When my son unplugged my life support, he didn't know two things: that the hospital's security system never lost power, and that I was still alive inside my body, hearing everything. He called it mercy. But mercy doesn't sound like laughter in a dead man's room. That night, I didn't just survive. I recorded my own murder attempt. And today, I'm here to tell you what happened when the tape started playing. But before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching this from right now? Because if you've ever believed blood always means love, this story will make you think again. My name is Alan, and if you had asked me a year ago who I trusted more than anyone, I would have said my son. Not out of poetry, out of muscle memory. After my heart seized in the kitchen and the world tilted toward black, he was the one who signed the forms, spoke to the cardiologist, told my neighbors I'd be okay. The first night, when the ventilator lifted and fell, and the pulse monitor stitched green lines across the dark, he set his hand on my shoulder. Warm, familiar. A weight I knew from Little League bleachers and graduation photos. He said, "I'm here." I blinked once to let him know I understood. He took that blink like an inheritance he didn't have to earn. On the third day, I learned the language of machines. The ventilator's breath has a rhythm. Draw, hold, release. Like an ocean that forgot how to be water. The fourth pump clicks every 8 seconds when it's happy and screams when it's thirsty. The heart monitor is honest until it isn't. I counted the sounds the way a child counts sheep. I counted the footsteps too. The compact shuffle of the night nurse with the lilac perfume, the heavy heel toe of the respiratory tech who whistled out of tune, Henry's stride, which had a confident little pause whenever he approached the door, like he had to smooth his face into the version he wanted me to see. The air tasted like metal shavings. The clock on the wall clicked without mercy. He brought me old photographs on a Thursday and set them where I could see the corners. He narrated them like a tour guide. "That's the fishing pier, remember? You told me patience is something you do with your hands." He laughed at his own line and tilted the frame so the overhead light caught the glass. He kept his voice warm, but his eyes kept landing not on me, not on the frames, but on the manila folder he had placed on the visitor chair. My name was written on the tab in his neat professional print. When the nurse came to adjust my tubes, he slid the folder under his coat the way people tuck away receipts they plan to explain later. When the doctor spoke of recovery goals, weaning the ventilator, assessing my swallow, reintroducing speech, Henry squeezed my fingers and answered for me. "We'll do whatever you recommend," he said, but the "we" was a net he threw over my mouth. Later, when the shift quieted and the hall lights dimmed to a low amber, he leaned close, voice thin and sympathetic. "They say I should help make decisions till you're stronger. Temporary, of course. Just sign off on a few things so the insurance doesn't stall." He unfolded the folder like a magician revealing a dove. Papers with my name. Boxes where a shaky signature would live. The pen rested on a line like a knife on a cutting board. He pressed it between my fingers. My hand didn't respond. He sighed with the patience of a saint who's practiced his lines in the bathroom mirror. "We'll try again tomorrow." You learn a lot about people when they think you're asleep. The curtain is a suggestion, not a wall. At 2:11 a.m., voices bend into corners, and truth slips out with the coffee breath. He took calls on speaker, low volume, words like release, assets, timelines. Once a woman's voice, cool, efficient, asked if I had updated the beneficiary. "It's in progress," Henry said. "He's lucid but exhausted." I don't want to stress him. He used the word protect 3 times in 10 minutes. Protection is a nice coat you can hide a knife inside. When my throat finally learned how to catch air without the machine, the respiratory tech gave me a trial. 5 minutes off the ventilator under close watch. The room sounded larger without the mechanical breathing, and in the silence I could hear the old building settling. A distant knock, a murmur through ducts, someone laughing 2 rooms down. I looked at Henry and mouthed slowly, "Water." He smiled like he'd invented thirst and dipped a pink sponge in a cup to wet my lips. "We take it slow," he said. "We don't want any setbacks." He emphasized "we" the way a politician says community from a podium flanked by flags. The first time he brought up the house, it was gentle. The second time, it was practical. Property taxes due next month, he said, eyes on the heart monitor like it had the answer. I can cover it, obviously, but it'd be cleaner if things were aligned. The attorney says a medical guardianship is standard in situations like this. He framed it as tidying up, as if the only mess in the room was the paperwork and not the way his voice sharpened when I blinked too slowly. I stared at the ceiling crack and imagined following it like a map, out past the fluorescent hum, through the ductwork, down the service stairs, into a night that smelled like wet asphalt. I imagined my wife's old scarf, the one that held the ghost of her perfume. I imagined anything that wasn't this bed with its rails raised like a crib for an old man. I started keeping time by the nurse named Uma, who spoke in a whisper that never felt like pity. She adjusted the pillows with a competence that made me want to salute, and when she leaned near, I could see a tiny scar along her jaw that caught the light like a piece of thread. "You're stronger today," she said once, not as encouragement, but as measurement. She was the one who warned me in a language of eyebrows and pauses. When Henry asked her about visiting hours and paperwork, she smiled professionally and drew the curtain a fraction more than necessary. After he left, she placed a small device under the sheet near my hip, a button with a rubber face in a red center. "If you feel unsafe," she whispered, "press this. It pings us faster than the call bell." The button was warm from her hand. Safety in that room looked like a circle the size of a coin. A storm came the next evening, rattling the window in its frame. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and the rain hit the glass in anxious fingers. Henry arrived late, damp hair combed forward, a smile that looked stapled on. He checked the door, checked the hallway, checked the machine. He leaned over me and tucked the blanket too tightly around my legs. "You look tired," he said, voice bright with relief, like the weather had given him permission to be a better son. He brushed a knuckle along the ventilator tubing and sighed. "No one wants this for you." I saw it then, the tiny tremor of excitement he couldn't hide when the monitor blipped irregularly. He reached for the plug at the wall, not the main cord, but the line to the alarm, and held it, testing the weight the way a child tests forbidden candy in the dark. I felt my tongue turn to stone in my mouth. My chest ached with the memory of air. The room hummed. The storm flashed white across the window, and for an instant his face was a mask carved from someone else's son. He let go and patted my hand. "Soon," he said to the ceiling. Maybe to me, maybe to the number in his head. After that, I stopped blinking to reassure him. I learned how to be still in a way that made him nervous. I let the hours gather. I let the papers accumulate. When the doctor asked if I was ready to try the speaking valve, Henry answered that perhaps another day would be safer, given how fragile I seemed. Uma's eyebrow climbed a millimeter. The doctor hesitated. The rain softened to a whisper that sounded like someone shushing a child. Night returned. The hallway lights sank to low tide. A shift change whispered through like a ghost army. Carts, sandals, the murmur of clipped names and dosages. I watched the crack in the ceiling and let the world move around me. It's funny. Near the end of a life, you notice the choreography of strangers. The orderly whose left shoe squeaked every fifth step. The volunteer who built origami cranes for anyone who met his eyes. The janitor who hummed the same 4 notes at 3 a.m. on the dot. Each pattern is proof that the world carries on with or without your permission. On the 7th night, Henry arrived with a smile too wide and a voice too low. He kissed my forehead like a priest before last rites. He stood very still and listened to the ventilator breathe for me. He checked the corridor and gently, almost tenderly, slid the alarm line from its socket. The room didn't scream. The storm had passed, but the air felt electric. He placed 2 fingers on the main power cord and paused, eyes shining with tears that had learned their cue. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered, and for a heartbeat, 1 clean green spike on the monitor. I saw the boy who once cried over a sparrow that fell from a nest. Then he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man who had practiced the distance he needed. The fluorescent light buzzed. The crack on the ceiling ran like a vein. The ventilator sighed. The room held its breath with me. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled over a seam in the floor. Uma's perfume, faint as a memory, reached me through cotton and plastic. Henry's eyes met mine, and in them I saw calculation wrapped in mercy, mercy wrapped in calculation, indistinguishable in the dark. He tightened his grip on the cord and leaned close enough that I felt the warmth of his breath against my cheek. "You can rest now," he said, and the words were soft enough to be a prayer and sharp enough to cut. The window showed only my reflection, an old man with a tube in his mouth, a son with a promise in his palm, and the smallest red button hidden beneath a sheet. When the machine stopped screaming, silence became a shape I could see. It pressed against the edges of the room, heavy and fragile, like glass stretched too thin. I woke inside that silence with a throat dry enough to bleed and a memory that flickered like an old film reel. My son's hand on the cord, his whisper, the static buzz of the light above. I tried to move, but the body I'd owned for 72 years felt like it belonged to someone else. My lungs hurt from breathing on their own again, each inhale a rough bargain with the world. They said I'd been lucky. The backup system caught the drop before the line went flat. The nurse, Uma, had walked in at the exact moment the alarm should have wailed. She told me later her instincts didn't trust the silence. "You don't switch off a life like you unplug a lamp," she said, eyes hard but voice soft. The hospital launched an internal review. "Equipment failure," Henry called it. He brought flowers, yellow ones, the kind that die first in a vase. His shirt was crisp, his face tired in all the practiced ways. "I thought I lost you," he said, and he almost made it sound true. I wanted to tell him I heard everything, that the walls have ears when they need to, but my voice wasn't ready. It rasped like a match-striking stone and died in my throat. So I listened. When people think you can't speak, they stop pretending. He talked to the doctors like a shareholder, demanding quarterly updates. "We can handle the decisions," he'd say, patting my hand for emphasis. "He shouldn't be burdened." The word burden lingered like smoke. He called my lawyer that afternoon. I saw his reflection in the glass door, smiling the way men smile when paperwork feels lighter than guilt. The hospital social worker came on day 3. Clipboard, polite tone, too many checkboxes. She said there were new guardianship forms filed under Henry's name, just in case. The ink wasn't even dry. I blinked once for no, twice for yes, but she didn't understand my code. When she left, Uma stayed behind. "They think you're too weak to notice," she whispered and tucked a small recorder under my pillow. "For your own proof," she said. It was one of those voice-activated ones the nurses used for dictation. It keeps time better than memory. That night, I recorded the sound of Henry telling the attending physician that Dad's not the same anymore. I recorded him ordering takeout and laughing on the phone about next steps. I recorded him calling the realtor. The word escrow sat like ice on my tongue. Every lie became a line of static waiting to be translated. They moved me to a quieter ward on the 5th day. Smaller, older, fewer eyes. Henry said it was better for recovery. Uma called it isolation. "He's moving pieces," she warned. I nodded, though my neck hurt. I started writing with what they gave me. The hospital notepad, the stub of a pencil. Letters crooked but legible enough. The first thing I wrote was her name. The second was, "He tried to kill me." She read it once and never asked questions again. "We'll keep you safe," she said, "but you need to keep acting weak." So I did. I let my eyelids flutter like exhaustion, let my hands shake when he brought the lawyer in, let him believe the drugs had eaten my memory. He talked about the house again, the one my late wife and I built with our hands, brick by brick, weekend by weekend. He said keeping it in the family would be easier with his name first. "For the taxes," he added, smiling. I nodded faintly. He smiled wider, mistaking surrender for consent. People always do. When the attorney left, he stood at my bedside longer than usual. "You know, Dad," he said, "it's hard watching you suffer." His fingers brushed the rail where the cord had once been. The look he gave me wasn't cruelty. It was relief, the relief of a man who almost got away with it. I stared at him until he turned his head. He couldn't hold the silence the way I could. He filled it with noise, checking his watch, adjusting his cufflink. "Rest now," he said, and walked out, whistling something cheerful. That evening, Uma found the recorder. She downloaded the files onto her phone, listened to 10 seconds, and froze. "He really did it," she whispered. I nodded. She looked at me like she wanted to apologize for the entire species. "We'll handle this carefully," she said. "We need official proof." Security footage, logs, timestamps. I watched her slip the device into her pocket like a sacred thing. I started dreaming of air, of rooms without wires, of the smell of rain before lightning. I dreamt of my wife's voice saying, "Don't rush your revenge. Let him hang himself with his own rope." When I woke, the line between dream and memory blurred, and I couldn't tell if I was listening to ghosts or strategy. On the seventh morning, Henry brought a priest. "It's time to make peace," he said. The priest prayed over me. Henry bowed his head, hands folded just enough to look devout. When he left, the priest lingered, uneasy. "Your son's impatient," he said softly. "I've seen this before. Inheritance turns mercy into math." I blinked once. He nodded, took my hand, and said, "God's watching." I hoped he was recording too. By the end of the week, my chart read improving. Henry frowned when he saw it. "Maybe they're overestimating," he told the nurse. "He has good days, but not that good." The nurse smiled without answering. After he left, she whispered, "You're stronger than his fear." Her words stuck with me. Fear is louder than guilt. It leaks through smiles, through perfectly pressed shirts, through every carefully rehearsed gesture. When they finally removed the ventilator, I felt the world rush in like surf against a broken dam. My first sound wasn't a word. It was a growl that surprised even me. Henry clapped politely. "Look at that," he said. "Making progress." I whispered back, hoarse and slow. "I remember everything." His face drained of color like someone pulled the plug on his blood. He forced a laugh. "You're confused," he said. "The meds." I cut him off. "The machine has a backup feed." The words shredded my throat, but I kept going. "Uma saw you." He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence between us felt like justice sharpening its blade. Then I closed my eyes and pretended to drift back to sleep, because revenge, like healing, needs patience. The tape was safe with Uma. The footage was safe in the hospital's archive. And my son, for the first time, was afraid of a man who could barely breathe. That's how recovery began. Not with forgiveness, not with peace, but with breath measured in revenge. The night it happened for real began like every other night they thought I wouldn't remember. The corridor lights sank from hospital white to a low amber that turned every shadow into a secret. The air conditioner clicked on and off like an anxious metronome. I lay still beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and the coin-warm scent of bodies that have been too long in bed. The monitor painted the dark with thin green strokes. Somewhere, far down the hall, wheels rolled over a metal threshold and made a sound like a drawer closing on old letters. I told myself to catalog it all, in case memory tried to bargain later. The exact hum of the ballast above me, the draft that slipped under the window frame, the dryness that turned my tongue to paper. Henry arrived late, carrying the storm with him. Not rain this time, weather inside a man. His hair was combed back too neatly, the way he does when he needs a certain kind of permission. He set his phone face down on the chair, screen still glowing. He studied me like he was reading an instrument panel and needed the needle to drop. I watched the tendon in his jaw pulse. I watched his eyes move to the wall outlets, the way a thirsty man looks at a faucet. "You resting?" he asked too softly, voice designed to be remembered by anyone who might be listening. I couldn't answer with a word, but silence, if you know how to hold it, becomes a weapon. He fussed with the blanket, with the pillow, with the angle of the ventilator tubing, as if the tube were a ribbon he could smooth into something pretty. "No one wants this for you," he murmured, and the sentence hung above us like a mobile made of knives. He glanced toward the door. No footsteps, no voices. The amber light bit into the metal rail at my side and turned it into a thin blade of sunless afternoon. He reached for the alarm line first, thumb and forefinger testing the plug the way a safecracker tests a dial. "It's just the noise," he said to the air, not to me. "You need quiet." He slid it out. The room didn't cry out, just a tiny gasp as the panel went dumb. My chest began to measure time on its own. Count, count, count. The body is a stubborn animal. It tries to live even when your son decides you're done. I could feel the ventilator pushing breath with its practiced patience. Draw, hold, release, and I felt it in my spine the way you feel a tide when your head is under. Henry's hand hovered over the main line now. The black cord coiled on itself like a sleeping snake. He was close enough that I saw a small nick on his knuckle from some earlier ordinary injury, proof that even the cruel have to open cans and carry boxes and live inside bodies that remind them they're not gods. He lowered his head. His cheek brushed mine. "You can rest now, Dad." His thumb found the plug. I didn't pray. I didn't beg. I pressed the red circle under the sheet with a hand that felt like it belonged to a stranger. The rubber face yielded. The silent pager in the nurse's station would blink. I counted again. 1, 2, 3. He pulled. The ventilator didn't stop like a door slamming. It fluttered and then stuttered, like a bird that forgot how to fly. The sound it made was almost apologetic. Air thinned. The ceiling stepped back. My heart monitor faltered. A glitch, a lurch. The green line making a small, crooked river. Breath became a coin I couldn't afford. The window fogged not with weather, but with the idea of weather, a memory of winter on the inside of glass. My hands wouldn't move. My jaw was a locked gate. The world narrowed to the soft fabric taste in my mouth and Henry's breath near my ear, and the realization that he was waiting for my face to become a story he could tell later about Mercy. The curtain lifted. Not fully. Just enough for Uma to step through like a shadow that remembered it was a person. The smell of lilac and hand sanitizer arrived with her as if it had a heartbeat. She took in the unplugged alarm, the silent panel, the angle of Henry's shoulders, the way my eyes were open without being seen. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She moved with the calm only people who've been in rooms like this too often can manage. She went to the wall and pushed the alarm line home until it clicked. Then she reached past him and reseated the ventilator cord with a firm push that made the machine exhale like a tired animal. The monitor rallied, uncertain, then steady. She looked at Henry as if he were a spill she'd mop in a minute. "We had a surge," she said, voice neutral enough to be quoted later. "Don't touch the equipment, sir." Henry had already stepped back, hands up, the mask on. "I was helping," he said. He panicked. What was I supposed to do? The question dangled between us like a rope thrown across a river from a man who had no intention of crossing. Uma checked my pupils with her penlight, recorded the time, touched the inside of my wrist with 2 fingers and a truth I could finally hold. Her glance told me she had heard the red button. Her glance told me she would remember exactly how this room looked when she walked in. She filed the moment in some private ledger where nurses keep the things that keep them awake. It didn't become a scene. Scenes are for people who can afford them. She called for a bedside check that sounded routine on the intercom. A second nurse slipped in. A respiratory tech rolled a cart over the seam in the floor that makes that signature clack. The ventilator settled into its old rhythm. The panel showed green again. Henry put on concern like an apron. "We should transfer him," he said. "This unit is ancient. He shouldn't be somewhere with unreliable power." Uma's eyes flicked to the clock and back. "We'll review," she said. "You can wait in the lounge." He wanted to resist, to remain on stage, but he read her and left, hands clean, phone collected from the chair, door shutting on air that finally remembered how to hold us. Later, in the gray hour before morning, when fluorescent light makes everything uglier than it is, a supervisor came to take statements. Henry's was a careful block of words he could live inside. He'd been checking the line. He noticed a flicker. He flagged staff. He prevented catastrophe. The official line became equipment failure. The printout said electrical irregularity. The report tucked itself into a binder labeled with a number and a date. But Uma's notes were clean and cold, and the system tagged the time my red button tripped as precisely as an atomic clock. People forget machines have memories too. When the sun finally rose, thin and pale and unapologetic, Henry brought coffee he knew I couldn't drink and placed it where the smell would make a promise he had no intention of keeping. "Rough night," he said, and glanced at the wall as if the paint might corroborate him. I talked to the attending. "We'll move you to a quieter floor." I let my eyelids droop enough to suggest exhaustion rather than agreement. He took it as consent. He always did. They rolled me to the small ward with the humming radiator and the view of the parking lot where birds practice lifting themselves into the morning. They called it an upgrade. It felt like being shelved. The first thing Uma did in the new room was adjust the angle of the camera in the corner, as if by accident, so it captured the bed and the plug bank and the door. Different protocol here, she said aloud to no one. Everything's a little more thorough. She smoothed the blanket and, with a motion no one could call suspicious, pressed the red button to test response time. 30 seconds. She nodded. A private oath. That afternoon, Henry took a call in the bathroom and forgot the echo. Yes, Friday, he said. Discharge under home care. We'll finalize the deed Monday if all goes smoothly. He flushed like a man washing his hands of something, returned to the chair, and smiled at me with a future already arranged behind his teeth. Good news, he chirped. You're coming home. Home. The word scraped my ribs going in. Home meant the house my wife's hands had made less lonely, the stairs that still knew her weight, the pantry that kept the smell of her cinnamon long after jars were cleaned and put away. Home meant the place he wanted to turn into numbers. I watched his mouth shape the syllable and imagined following the crack in that hospital ceiling all the way back to my front door. I slept a while and dreamt of my wife in an apron she never owned, telling me not to wake yet. Let him think you're softer than you are, she said, eyes the color of the good plates we never used. Let him build the stage. Then speak. When I opened my eyes, the room had agreed to be real again. Uma stood at the foot of the bed, chart in hand. Henry had stepped out to take another call. She looked up and gave me the smallest, fiercest nod. If you go home, she whispered, you don't go alone. In the evening, he returned with papers arranged like a priest's vestments. Just logistics, he said, tapping where the pen would eventually press. Home health signatures. I'll handle everything else. He stacked the pages carefully and slid them under the chair, as if tucking a child in. Friday, he repeated, and the word felt like the soft pad of a predator's paw on carpet. I stared out of the window at a single crow perched on the lamppost over the parking lot, its beak opening on a caw I couldn't hear through the glass. The new room's camera recorded the angle of his hand when he moved the forms. The wall clock recorded the time. The air recorded the smell of the coffee he didn't drink. My body recorded the weight of the decision that was being made without me. I closed my eyes and practiced the shape of a man who would let himself be carried to a car and driven to his own house like a piece of furniture being returned to the showroom. I slept as if someone had turned me off and on. When I woke, the sky was a dense blue, the kind you only get right before darkness chooses itself. On the tray beside the bed, Uma had left a folded scrap of paper under the spoon. I palmed it when Henry leaned in to kiss my forehead. Later, alone, I opened it. 4 words, a location, and a time. The handwriting was neat and small, the kind of hand that believes in accuracy as a form of mercy. Friday, then. The house. The stage he'd built with his confident hands and tidy lies. The recorder Uma would return at the meeting point. The cameras I would hide in corners he never noticed because he never looked at his own life as if it could betray him back. I turned my head toward the window, toward the lamppost, toward the crow that had been replaced by a clean square of sky, and let the image fix itself in me, the way a plan fixes a shaking hand. He thinks I'm coming home to die quietly. I'm going home to listen. When they finally wheeled me out of the hospital, the day was so bright it hurt. Sunlight cracked open the world like an egg, and every sound outside the ward was too loud, too clean, too alive for a man who had listened to machines breathe for him. Henry held the discharge papers like they were a prize. Fresh air, Dad, he said. Just what you need. I sat in the wheelchair with the blanket over my knees and watched his reflection in the glass doors. He looked younger in sunlight, not because he was innocent, but because guilt hadn't learned how to follow him outdoors yet. At home, the air had its own language. The front door still creaked on the hinge I'd never fixed. The hall smelled faintly of my wife's perfume, long faded but loyal. Dust had gathered on the photograph above the mantel. The 3 of us at the lake, her hand resting on my shoulder, Henry squinting against the light. He didn't look at it when he passed. He went straight to the paperwork on the kitchen table. You'll stay in the downstairs room, he said, the one that used to be her sewing room. Less stairs, easier access. He didn't say control, but the word hung in the air anyway. The first night home, I listened. Old houses don't know how to be quiet. The water heater ticks like a nervous heart. The refrigerator exhales every hour. The walls remember storms. Henry moved through the rooms above me with that same deliberate rhythm. Pause, step, pause. The rhythm of a man who checks on locks more often than conscience. I lay in bed and thought about what Uma had written on that folded paper. Don't react until you have proof. Proof meant patience, and patience had kept me alive in wars I never wanted to talk about. Morning brought ritual. Henry made coffee for himself, none for me. He filled out forms in the dining room, phone on speaker, tone courteous. Yes, power of attorney is pending, he told someone. Yes, he's resting. Doctor says minimal stimulation. He kept the blinds half closed, like truth might try to climb in through the sunlight. When I shuffled into the kitchen with the walker, he turned too quickly. Careful, Dad. You're still weak. Weakness was what he wanted to see. It made him feel safe. I let him. Uma's plan unfolded quietly. 2 days after discharge, a plain white envelope arrived addressed to me. Henry slid it open before I reached the table. Just insurance, he said, tossing it aside. But I saw the corner of the note she'd hidden inside, a service number written in her small, tidy hand. I called when he left for work, whispering into the phone like a conspirator. A man's voice answered, low and certain. Detective Ortiz, we spoke with Nurse Uma. We're looking into the irregularities from your admission. Do not confront your son yet. Just keep documenting. His tone was professional but not cold. It sounded like someone who had read too many reports about people who didn't wait for help. I began my own routine. Every morning before Henry returned, I recorded my observations. The date, the way he handled my pills, the calls he made when he thought I was sleeping. I hid the recorder inside the hollow of the old radio cabinet in the corner. When I felt strong enough, I moved through the house and took photographs of the documents he left lying around. Copies of the deed, unsigned drafts of new wills, a financial statement from a bank I didn't recognize. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming breath. One evening he came home early and found me standing at the window. What are you looking at? He asked. Just the sunset, I said. He came closer, close enough for me to smell the cologne he only wore to meetings. It's beautiful, he said, voice soft, almost loving. You deserve peace now, Dad. No more hospitals, no more pain. He brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. His hand trembled slightly, the way it had when he'd touched the ventilator cord. My skin crawled with memory, but I didn't flinch. Peace, I repeated. That's all any of us want. He smiled then, thinking I meant it the way he did. The next morning, 2 men in plain suits came to the door while Henry was at work. They claimed to be from the insurance company. They weren't. They carried a small case and a warrant for the hospital's surveillance footage. They set up a camera in my living room, hidden inside the clock she'd once called ugly. We'll have eyes here, Ortiz said. If he tries again, we'll know. I thanked him, but gratitude felt hollow. I didn't want protection anymore. I wanted understanding, how a son learns to treat love like currency. For 3 days I played the role, weak, grateful, compliant. He checked my medication, refilled the glass by my bed, asked questions he already knew the answers to. Do you remember the night the power went out in the hospital? He said casually. I met his eyes. Some of it. He nodded slowly, calculating. I just want you to be comfortable. He didn't know comfort for me was a sharper thing now, a knife polished by memory. On the 4th night, the silence changed. I heard him on the phone again, voice lower than before. It's set, he said. Friday. After the signing, he hung up and poured himself a drink. I watched the shadow of his arm move across the curtain like a pendulum. He sat in the chair across from me, glass in hand, and started talking about the future. His, not ours. I might rent the place for a while, he said. Travel, maybe. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Knowing the house isn't empty? His words were almost kind. I nodded. Let him believe he was the author. But revenge is a slow story, and I had only written the first few pages. In the morning, Detective Ortiz called to confirm they had the footage from the hospital. Henry's hand, the cord, the exact timestamp when Uma reconnected it. "We'll move soon," he said. "Be ready." I told him I'd always been ready. That evening, I sat in the sewing room and listened to the walls breathe. I realized something simple and terrible. Dying wasn't the worst thing Henry could have done to me. Living long enough to see what he had become, that was worse. When the rain started, I opened the window, just enough to let the smell in. The air carried a kind of promise. In 2 days, he'd bring the lawyer here. He'd pour coffee, smile, ask for my signature. He'd think the house, the inheritance, the control, all of it was finally his. But the cameras would be watching, the recorder would be running, and the man he tried to bury would be waiting across the table, very much alive. Friday morning began with a sky the color of bruised steel, the kind of light that can't decide if it wants to belong to dawn or dusk. The air was thick with a silence that felt staged, like the world was holding its breath for what was coming. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, a cup of black coffee cooling between my hands, pretending my tremors were from weakness and not anticipation. Henry's footsteps on the stairs had a rhythm I could predict now. Calm, confident, self-assured. The footsteps of a man who thought everything was under control. "Morning, Dad," he said, his voice cheerful and rehearsed, the same way an actor greets the audience before stepping into his big scene. He wore a suit, the dark navy one he used to wear when his mother was alive. He'd ironed it this time, pressed sharp enough to draw blood. "Big day," I whispered. The words rasped out dry, intentional. He smiled. "Big day." He poured himself coffee and sat across from me. For a moment, it almost looked normal. Father and son sharing morning silence. But underneath that surface, I could feel the tension hum like electricity. His eyes kept flicking to the folder on the counter, the one with the legal documents the lawyer had prepared, the transfer papers, the ones that would officially make him owner of the house and executor of my estate. He thought I didn't understand any of it. He thought I'd been softened by age, dulled by medicine, fogged by trauma. He didn't know I'd memorized every line of those pages weeks ago when he left them open on the dining table. He didn't know I'd already rewritten my will with my own lawyer, with witnesses, and hidden the updated version in a safe place. Henry finished his coffee and stood. "Lawyer's coming at 2, he said. "You should rest till then." "Why?" "I want to be awake when we sign everything." He hesitated, studying me like a patient that just surprised the doctor by standing up mid-surgery. "Of course, Dad. Of course." After he left for his morning errands, I opened the drawer under the sink and pulled out the small voice recorder Uma had returned to me wrapped in a napkin 2 days ago. It was already running. Fresh batteries, new memory card, time-stamped. I placed it inside the old ceramic cookie jar on the counter, the one Henry never touched because he thought I still hid stale biscuits inside. Then I walked slowly through the house, room by room, like I was greeting ghosts. The hallway photos, the worn rug, the old clock ticking unevenly on the wall. Everything looked smaller now, less like home and more like evidence waiting to be archived. In the living room, the clock Detective Ortiz had planted blinked a tiny red light only I could see if I tilted my head right. The system was live. I was being watched, protected, recorded, this time for my survival, not my death. By noon, rain started falling, soft and steady, turning the windows into mirrors. I saw my reflection, pale, thinner than before, but sharper around the eyes. My wife used to say, "Alan, your silence scares people." She was right. Silence has a weight, and today that weight was going to bury my son's lies. At 1:30, Henry's car pulled into the driveway. A black sedan followed. The lawyer's. I stood in the living room waiting, leaning on my cane for realism. When Henry opened the door, the smell of his cologne hit me first. Cedar and mint. It reminded me of the day he graduated college, when pride had meant something. Behind him, the lawyer stepped in. Mr. Dawson, a man in his 60s with a handshake that tried too hard to be kind. "Good afternoon, Mr. Allen," he said. "Henry tells me you're ready to finalize the property arrangements." "That's what he tells you," I said, voice calm but heavy enough to land. Dawson blinked. Henry's smile tightened. "Dad's just joking," Henry said quickly. "He's been in good spirits lately." "Joking," I repeated softly. "Right." They sat at the table. Henry spread the documents out, lining each sheet neatly, aligning the edges as if order could hide intention. "These are straightforward," he said. "Just signatures to make things official. Once this is done, everything's secure." Secure, that word again. He'd used it so often it had lost its meaning. He wanted my security to be his freedom. I signed the first page. My signature shook just enough to look authentic for the image he wanted. He smiled at the lawyer. "See? He's comfortable with it." Before the second page, I looked at him. "You know," I said, "the hospital called me yesterday." His pen froze midair. "The hospital?" "Yes. Something about a maintenance report." He forced a laugh. "Oh, that old power surge issue?" They said the surge only affected one outlet, the one connected to my ventilator. The room shifted. Even the rain seemed to pause against the glass. Dawson looked between us, uncertain. Henry cleared his throat. "Dad, that's technical talk. You wouldn't—" They also mentioned the nurse. Umai leaned forward, voice steady now. "Said she filed a statement. Said the footage didn't match the report." The color drained from his face like someone had pulled the plug on his blood again. "Footage," he whispered. "Security footage," I said. "And the timestamp. You remember, don't you? When you told me to rest?" Dawson looked uneasy. "Maybe we should—" "No, please," I interrupted. "Let's finish. After all, this is about inheritance, isn't it? About what a son deserves." Henry stood, his chair scraping the floor. "Dad, that's enough," I smiled. "I agree." That was when Detective Ortiz stepped through the front door, badge glinting, rainwater dripping from his coat. Behind him, two officers followed quietly, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. "Henry Allen?" Ortiz said. Henry spun toward him, pale as ash. "What is this?" "Arrest warrant," Ortiz said calmly. "Attempted murder, elder abuse, financial fraud." Dawson stammered. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Ortiz said. He pulled a small tablet from his coat pocket and tapped it once. The screen lit up. On it played a silent video. A hospital room. A man leaning over a bed, unplugging a cord, whispering something into the ear of a dying old man. Henry lunged forward. "That's taken out of context." Ortiz nodded to one officer. "Cuff him." As they pulled Henry's hands behind his back, he looked at me, desperate, betrayed by the mirror he'd built. "Dad, you set me up." "No," I said. "You set yourself up." I just pressed record. They led him outside into the rain. The lawyer followed, speechless, his briefcase clutched like a shield. The door closed, and the sound of the rain filled the silence he left behind. I sat back in my chair. My pulse was steady. The air tasted like something clean. Not victory, but release. On the table, the papers lay unsigned, wet from the condensation of my coffee cup. I stared at my trembling hand and realized it wasn't shaking anymore. Through the window, I watched the police car pull away. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. It breathed with me, not against me. The ghost of my wife's perfume drifted from the hallway, faint but real. I whispered into the quiet, "He won't hurt anyone again." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away, low, patient, final. And I thought, the price of breathing is truth. And today I'd finally paid it. The house was still humming with the echo of what had happened when the lawyer came back the next day to collect his forgotten briefcase. The yellow tape across the doorway flapped in the wind, its sound like a deck of cards being shuffled. He stood there awkwardly, hat in his hands, the way men do at funerals when they want to show respect but not guilt. "Mr. Allen," he said, "I didn't know." "Most people don't," I answered. My voice surprised me. It had steadied overnight, as if it had been waiting years for its own authority to return. The lawyer left quickly, boots squeaking against the porch. When the door shut, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. Detective Ortiz called that afternoon. "We've confirmed the footage," he said. "The DA's office will be pressing full charges. Your son won't be able to post bail." He paused, maybe waiting for relief or maybe pity. I gave him neither. "What happens next?" I asked. "There'll be a hearing. Then the evidence presentation." He hesitated. "You can attend if you want." Attend, as if this were a graduation ceremony. I spent the evening walking through my house the same way you walk through a museum of your own mistakes. In the living room, the clock camera blinked its final red light before shutting down. Case closed. I unplugged it gently, the irony not lost on me. In the kitchen, the cookie jar still held the recorder. I played the last file, listening to Henry's voice in rewind. The lies, the rehearsed concern, the half-whispered greed. It was strange how calm it sounded now, like a ghost who'd already realized he's dead. The next morning, the prosecutor asked if I'd be willing to make a statement for the hearing. "Your testimony will help," she said. Her tone was clipped, efficient. I told her I would. I owed it to Uma, to Ortiz, to every nurse who kept people alive while their families played God. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and coffee that had given up trying to be fresh. The fluorescent lights buzzed with the same pitch as the ones in the hospital. A cruel kind of symmetry. They sat me in the front row, away from the cameras. When Henry entered, wearing the orange jumpsuit that drains the dignity out of anyone, I looked at him and felt nothing I expected to feel. No rage, no victory, just distance. The same kind that settles between two continents long after the bridge has collapsed. He tried to catch my eye. I didn't give him that mercy. The prosecutor spoke first, clean and clinical. She laid out the timeline like a blueprint. The unplugging, the forged papers, the financial transfers, the surveillance footage, the recordings. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin he had built with his own hands. When my name was called, I stood and took the oath. The courtroom quieted, 1,000 eyes watching the man who had refused to die. "I'm Alan," I began, 72 years old, decorated veteran, father to one son. My voice didn't shake. He tried to kill me for a house and an account he never earned. I heard everything. I remember everything. And I forgive nothing. The judge's pen froze. Someone in the back coughed. Henry's shoulders slumped just enough to reveal the boy he once was, the one who used to press toy soldiers into the dirt beside me and ask how wars ended. I wanted to tell him they never really do. When it was over, Ortiz met me outside. The afternoon sun was bright, too bright. "You did good, sir," he said. "He'll serve time." I nodded. "It's not about time," I said. "It's about the record." He understood. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the crickets start their endless conversation. The neighborhood kids rode their bikes past my fence, their laughter weaving through the dusk. One of them waved. I waved back, and for the first time, it felt like a gesture that belonged to the living. Uma called just before midnight. "I watched the news," she said. "You look strong." "I'm breathing," I told her. "That's stronger than most." After we hung up, I walked back inside and looked at the hospital papers on the counter. My name, my diagnosis, my survival. I folded them carefully and placed them next to my wife's framed photo. She'd been gone 8 years, but tonight it felt like she was sitting beside me, the scent of her lavender lotion still hiding somewhere in the wood grain. "You'd have liked the ending," I whispered. "You always said truth has its own pulse." Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded, a reminder that other stories were still beginning, other silences still waiting to be broken. I turned off the light, leaving the house in its quiet honesty. For the first time in a long time, the darkness didn't feel like something closing in. It felt like something earned. The day they called it. The will reading felt almost theatrical, like the world had saved one last curtain call just to test whether I still had the strength to stand in the spotlight. The courthouse was smaller this time, a private chamber reserved for estate matters. The air smelled faintly of ink, wood polish, and nerves. Everyone sat in perfect order. The lawyer, the prosecutor, 2 witnesses, and me. The man they once expected to die quietly in a hospital bed. Henry wasn't there in person. Prison doesn't allow appearances for civil proceedings. Instead, his face flickered on a small monitor placed at the end of the table. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same technology that had captured his crime now carried his ghost into the room. He looked thinner, his jawline sharper, his eyes duller. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar. Maybe fear, maybe regret, maybe just the weight of consequence finally catching up. The lawyer, Mr. Dawson, cleared his throat. His voice trembled slightly when he said, "We're here to settle the estate of Mr. Alan Porter." I noticed the hesitation before he continued. "There has been a revised version of the will submitted to the court, dated 3 days before Mr. Porter's discharge from the hospital." Henry's head snapped up on the monitor. "3 days before?" he asked, suspicion cutting through his calm like a blade. "Yes," Dawson said, unfolding the document. "This version supersedes the previous draft prepared under your authority. It was witnessed by Nurse Uma D'Souza and Dr. Leonard Park. Both signatures verified I didn't move, didn't blink. I let the words build their own rhythm." Dawson began reading. "I, Alan Porter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all prior wills and testaments. I leave my estate, in its entirety, to the Alan and Evelyn Foundation, a charitable trust for medical negligence victims and caregivers." Silence. Heavy, pulsing, alive. On the screen, Henry's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to something raw and wild. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "You can't... He wasn't... That's not legal. He wasn't in his right mind. The lawyer didn't even look at him." "The attending physician confirmed full cognitive recovery before this will was signed," he said. "In fact, Mr. Porter insisted on recording a video statement for the record." The monitor on the other side of the room flickered. A second video began to play. There I was, pale, still in a hospital gown, but alert, lucid. My voice filled the room. "I know what I'm doing. If you're watching this, then you already know what my son did. This is not revenge. This is balance. The house, the money. They meant nothing the moment he unplugged my life to claim them. What matters now is truth. Let my inheritance go where it can heal, not destroy." The video ended. The silence afterward was colder than any winter I'd lived through. Henry's voice cracked through the screen. "You're lying. You forged it. You made me..." But the words stumbled and fell apart. The lawyer folded the papers, his motions deliberate, final. "The court accepts the revised will. The estate will be transferred accordingly." Henry slammed his hands against the table on his side of the screen. "You think this makes you a hero?" he spat. "You ruined my life." I looked directly into the camera. "No, Henry. You did that when you tried to end mine," the feed cut. The monitor went black, and with it, the last shadow of his power. For a long time, no one moved. Then the prosecutor gathered her folders and said quietly, "That was justice without vengeance. Rare thing to see." She nodded once and left. Dawson exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I've practiced law 30 years, he said. "Never seen a man face death twice and still choose mercy." "It's not mercy," I said. "It's closure." Outside, the afternoon light was gold and sharp. I stepped into it like a man learning to breathe again. A group of reporters waited by the steps, their microphones trembling with anticipation. I could have spoken, could have told them how betrayal doesn't always announce itself with cruelty, how sometimes it wears love like a disguise. But I didn't. I just smiled faintly and walked past. Some stories deserve silence more than headlines. When I reached home, the house was quiet. Not hollow anymore, just still. I brewed coffee, the real kind, not the weak hospital stuff. The smell filled the air, earthy and grounding. On the counter sat a stack of envelopes from the foundation, stamped with my name. Applications from families who needed help. From people who almost died because someone else thought their life was less valuable than a signature. I read the first letter. A widow whose husband had been neglected by hospital staff. She wrote about sitting by a bed and praying for one more breath. Her handwriting trembled on the page, grief pressed into paper. I placed it beside the photo of my wife and whispered, "You'd have liked her courage." That night, I opened the window in the living room. The wind carried the scent of rain and lilac, Uma's perfume, or maybe just the memory of it. I sat in the dark and listened to the world outside. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed, the same pitch as the hospital monitor that once measured my existence. But now every beep in my mind had changed meaning. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was proof that I was alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a patient or a victim. I felt like a man who had reclaimed his story. And even though my son had lost everything he thought he owned, I had finally gained what mattered most: peace that couldn't be unplugged. The next morning, I called Uma. She answered with a smile in her voice. "You did it," she said. "No," I told her. "We did it. You saved my life. I just kept breathing." And for the first time, that sentence didn't feel like survival. It felt like freedom. The morning after the will hearing felt like the world had been reset. The same streets, the same air, but quieter somehow. Like even the wind was trying not to disturb what was left of me. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without jolting awake to the phantom hiss of machines or the echo of Henry's whisper. The nightmare had ended, yet its memory still sat somewhere behind my ribs, faint but permanent, like a scar under the skin that only hurts when it rains. I made breakfast the old way. Black coffee, 2 eggs, toast burned at the edges. The pan hissed as I cracked the eggs, and for a moment I stood still, listening. That sound had once meant mornings with Evelyn. She'd hum an old Billie Holiday tune while reading the newspaper aloud, skipping the bad news so I'd start my day with laughter instead of headlines. I hadn't realized until now how much noise she'd taken with her when she died. The kind of good noise that keeps loneliness from becoming an echo chamber. After breakfast, I dressed slow. The world moves too fast for men like me now. Men who've survived more than they intended to. I put on my old tweed coat, the one with the missing button she'd promised to fix but never did. In the pocket, I found a folded note from years ago in her handwriting. "Don't forget to buy lilies for Sunday." I smiled. Grief never leaves, it just learns how to wait quietly. At 10, I drove to the cemetery. The road curved through maple trees just beginning to turn amber, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and coming autumn. Her gravestone sat near the old oak, the same one we'd once picnicked under on our first anniversary. The marble was clean. Uma had told me she visited sometimes, left fresh flowers when I couldn't. Today I brought lilies, white ones. Evelyn always said they smelled like forgiveness. I knelt down, knees protesting but obedient. "You were right," I whispered, "about patience, about Henry, about everything." My voice cracked a little, and I let it. I thought revenge would make me feel alive again. But it's not revenge that does it. It's truth. Truth breathes deeper. The wind moved through the oak branches, scattering a few early leaves onto the grass. For a moment, I swore I could feel her hand on my shoulder, that same warm, steady touch that used to silence every storm in me. I stayed like that, head bowed, until the light shifted and the world reminded me it was still moving. On the way back, I stopped by the hospital, not because I needed to, because I wanted to. Uma met me in the lobby, surprise softening into a grin. "You're walking better," she said. "I had a good teacher," I told her. We sat on a bench by the window. She handed me a cup of coffee from the vending machine. The worst kind. Burnt and sweet, but warm. "The foundation's getting attention," she said. "People are already applying. Survivors, families. It's starting to mean something." "That's the point," I said. "If pain has to exist, at least let it build something after it's done destroying." Uma looked out the window, the reflection of light catching her face in half shadows. "You know," she said, "you could have left. Started over somewhere else. Why stay in this town?" "Because ghosts deserve company," I said, "and because forgiveness is quieter when it has walls to echo in." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that doesn't demand an answer. Before I left, she pressed a small flash drive into my hand. "Security footage," she said. "The full case file. You might want to keep it or delete it. Either way, it's yours." I drove home with the drive in my pocket, feeling its weight like a decision I hadn't made yet. The house greeted me in silence. The rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. The kind of rain that doesn't ask for attention, but gives it anyway. I sat by the fireplace, cold now, unused for years, and watched the drops trail down the glass. Each one carried its own small gravity, its own reflection. I plugged the drive into the old laptop. The screen flickered to life, and there I was, lying in the hospital bed, eyes half open, while Henry stood over me. I watched the moment again, not as a victim this time, but as a witness who survived. The whisper, the unplugging, the silence. Then Uma's hand entering the frame, reconnecting life to the wall, the machine exhaling, the green line returning. I didn't watch further. I closed the laptop gently, as if not to wake the ghost trapped inside. Then I walked to the backyard. The soil was damp from rain, soft underfoot. I dug a small hole beneath the rose bush Evelyn had planted the year Henry was born. I placed the flash drive in it and covered it back with earth. "You can rest now," I said. Not to the drive, not to Henry, but to myself. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The world smelled of wet leaves and clean beginnings. Somewhere down the street, a child was laughing, a dog barking, life carrying on without ceremony. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was watching it from behind glass. Inside, the heart monitor I kept from the hospital as a strange memento sat on the nightstand. I pressed the button. It beeped once. A soft, steady pulse. A reminder that after everything, my heart still worked. I lay back in bed, the same bed where Evelyn used to read to me, and let the rain play percussion on the roof. My eyes drifted shut. In that half-sleep, I saw the hospital light again. The same white glow that had once meant endings. Only this time, it wasn't harsh. It was warm. Somewhere between the rhythm of the rain and the fading echo of the beeps, I heard her voice. Quiet, patient, certain. "You can rest now, Alan." And for the first time, I did.